Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chart Chat, round 26. This is more than just chit chat, it's chart chat. We can credit my wife for coming up with that phrase. Our agenda today is going to be covering our 2021 year in review. That includes our favorite data viz topics and data visualizations and our favorite guests. And that'll be quick. We'll just go each of us through and talk about what we thought about our topics this past year. And then we'll get into I'm sure, a lively debate on the New York Times opinion spiral chart. And so with that, we'll go ahead and jump in. Let's do some introductions from everybody of who we are. Amanda.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Makulec. I'm the Executive Director for the Data Visualization Society and lead a data viz team at Excella. I'm excited to be here today and dig into some of our favorite things from the last year. Over to you, Andy.
Hi, everybody. Andy Cotgreave, Technical Evangelist at Tableau and co-author of The Big Book of Dashboards, also host of If Data Could Talk, a series about data culture, coming to you from Oxford, or near Oxford in England. Steve.
Hey, I'm Steve Wexler. I'm the founder, principal, sole employee of Data Revelations TM. I am one of 3 authors of the Big Book of Dashboards, along with Jeff and Andy, and the author of The Big Picture.
Thank you, everyone. You will notice if you've been part of Chart Chat before, we're trying a new platform here. So forgive us for any technical glitches we have today. We're using StreamYard and trying something new as our audience is expanding, and we're streaming to YouTube and maybe other platforms in the future. With that said, we're going to just jump right in. Please put in the chat window where you're from and joining us, maybe first time or recurring, and tell us where you're from. With that, I thought we would either go in alphabetical order or age order. You can decide, but I figured we'd start with Amanda.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jeff. All right. So a couple of my favorite things from this year as we walk through things that stood out to me. One, as we think about data visualizations, I first jumped into thinking about unit charts and all the different ways I've seen unit charts and pictograms used this year. But really that for me expanded out to looking at the ways that we have used graphical explainers as a means for us to go ahead and communicate complicated topics. And I've seen this in different science communications about things like, why are we seeing more reported cases occurring in those vaccinated now versus in previous periods? How do we explain things like Simpson's paradox? And I think that it's a really interesting way to take a more data visualization type approach, but not always with actual precise visualization, precise numbers or data sets, the way that we might be accustomed to seeing data visualizations. And you can check out some of these on some of the links that we'll share in the chat. I've also seen some of those same graphics and similar kind of pictograms shared oftentimes by hospitals and other groups in order to explain the different shares of people who are either infected with, hospitalized, or in the ICU. And it's been really interesting for me to see more clinical care groups actually jumping into creating data visualizations and sharing them out on social media, which I think has really spoken to a way in which we're changing how data visualizations are designed, used, and communicated, not just by data viz experts and data journalists, but by clinical care experts and people who are working at hospitals and other spaces. As we think about the explainers, the other way that data visualization has been used is oftentimes to explain complex and emerging changing topics. So this is a sample chart that is a maybe less easy to understand visualization from the New England Journal of Medicine. And we've seen a lot of different ways in which data journalists, here an example from John Byrne Murdoch, who was one of our guests this year, are taking these kind of charts or graphics that come out of different peer-reviewed journal articles or literature and actually reimagining them and visualizing them with better graphic design principles applied and more text explainers embedded in the graphic itself. So that when you see the graphic, it better explains what it is the graphic is trying to tell you and perhaps takes away some of the specificity that you see in some of the peer-reviewed journal articles and graphics there in terms of the specific numbers or time periods, but rather actually focuses on how do we get across a key message around here. when you actually are able to be detected through a lateral flow test if you're COVID positive, or a rapid antigen test, compared to being detectable via PCR. And so I think that there's been a lot of really interesting ways in which we've seen different graphic explainers used to communicate really complicated information, especially as we see wider uptake of different kinds of tests and the data that we have about topics like COVID-19 emerges and changes. Following along on John Byrne-Murdoch and some of the work that he's done, I want to point to the ways in which we've seen lots of iterative design over the course of the last year or more. This is actually one of the first charts that John published about the pandemic back in 2020, looking at these kind of annotations that were hand-drawn and handmade on a different chart or graph about case trajectories by country. And as we saw what he and his team at the Financial Times did over time, they both asked for input from different experts who might understand why there were anomalies or issues with the data, and came up with different ways to present and communicate data stories about the pandemic. And if you missed it, we did do Chart Chat 24 with John Byrne-Murdoch as our guest. And it is a great conversation all about the very iterative process that he used for building out these charts and working with his team to eventually automate how they are populated and updated. This kind of piece of building these data pipelines that our data journalists have done in order to populate these trackers is really remarkable, and something that we need to recognize a bit more in terms of the data labor that goes into building these charts. Last, I want to talk a little bit about something that changed my own practice and how I build charts and graphs and visualize data with right aligning axes. And this came out of our conversation with Rosamund Pike from The Economist. And in our conversation with her and talking about some of the unique and very well branded features of different charts and graphs produced by The Economist, their signature red line across the top, the ways in which they actually add text in different ways, and these right aligned axes, was really striking to me in terms of allowing that information to be present and available to my reader for context and making sure the overall range of the data was available without having it be the first thing that someone reads. And they do this in all of their charts, even the kind of zoomed in small multiple graphs that you see at the bottom, and in the larger single standalone charts. And just to kind of put a quick side-by-side comparison, if we move that axis over off to the right-hand side, we're able to keep the axis there, but also be able to add those initial labels or direct labels on a line chart off to the left and have someone read them first, versus perhaps having the more cluttery information like the axis off to the left-hand side. So for me, I've started testing out and doing a lot more alignment of my y-axis off to the right-hand side of my charts and graphs. And I really attribute that to the influence I've had from seeing a bunch of the great data journalism work coming out of The Economist and other teams. That wraps up my highlights for this year. So graphic explainers, John Byrne-Murdoch and iterative design approaches, and this really seemingly small change around right aligning different axes.
I love it, Amanda. If you didn't notice, Amanda like speaks in paragraphs. It's like she sat and wrote this all out last night, and it's like she's publishing a book here, right? She just you speak so well, Amanda.
I have no speaker notes, Jeff. I will
impressive. It's
no
super
speaker
impressive.
notes.
No, you would not know.
I'm strategic, though. I pick topics I care about.
I was just going to say, I personally love the iterative process this year. We 3 or 4 of our guests talked about that. Rosamund talked about it. John Byrne-Murdoch, the guys from the Atlas of the Invisible. That was probably one of my favorite things. I guess that brings us to Andy.
Well, yes. Hi, everybody. I am going to share our favorite chart type to rag on, Voronoi. So we talked about Voronoi in Chart Chat 19, and we looked at Steve looked at this one from the Wall Street Journal, which should be animating right now. Let's see if we can get it to animate. There you go. Wall Street Journal, and you can play around. It was from an article where you can play around with adding companies to a circle to see if the sum of the market capitalization of all those companies are bigger than the bigger company represented by the dotted line. In this case, that company was Airbnb. So we add Hyatt. We got a nice little poppy addition to the Voronoi. Expedia, we're still not big enough for 117 billion. Income's booking. Boom. We've done it. Now, Steve's discussion was about why this Voronoi might not have worked and why he didn't like this example. But he did like one from the New York Times from September 2020, where you could do the same kind of interaction to predict the outcome of the 2020 US presidential election. So our discussion primarily revolved around whether this would have been better as a stacked bar. In this instance, I agree. But there's a principle going on here that it's made me think about, and I've reflected on this, particularly in this Chart Chat 19, and it's something I've been thinking about for a long time. But I've never actually done anything to express it in slides or in a video. So I'm going to talk about how charts like Voronoi's might fit into a paradigm of thinking about a primary and a secondary level of insight. Let me explain. So I think this chart has two goals. I think when they built this chart, they had two goals. The first goal was the two goals. One of them is the sum of the selected companies bigger than Airbnb? And another goal is how big is each of the selected companies that you've dragged onto the bigger circle? So Steve, which one of these do you think is the primary goal of this visualization?
Gee, Andy, I didn't know I would be quizzed at the moment, but I would say yes. I think you are hoping that I will reply a certain way, and that would be the first assertion that you have.
Correct, right? The primary is this, and the secondary is that, right? It lets you see in a really visceral way that have you selected enough companies to be bigger than the circle? Okay, that is the primary thing. Secondarily, it shows the gist of the other information, not so accurately, but it does show that information for you. If you switch the goal around, if your goal as a designer is to be like, look, I really want to emphasize so that people can see how big each company is, then this Voronoi approach and any kind of size-based approach starts to fall apart. And at that point, it's like, well, now the primary goal is different. So we do need to change the chart type. So I did this with a waterfall chart. I tried it as a stack bar, but it didn't really have a appeal as well to me. But now you can still see secondarily is the sum of the selected companies bigger than Airbnb, but we're getting towards a primary goal where how big is each company? I don't profess to think that I've quite nailed this solution here for this primary secondary goal. I am also interested if anybody can find a way to make a bar chart, a regular bar chart comparing the selected companies, and also somehow convey if that's bigger than Airbnb, but I didn't manage to achieve that in preparation for this. So primary, secondary, let's take a more abstract example. 24 numbers, sales of A&B over a 12-month period. Two goals, show total sales over time, see specific sales of A&B in each time period. Let's assume your primary goal is show total sales over time, and the secondary goal is to see the specific sales, right? So you might think, oh, it's a line, I'll just draw a line chart. But if the primary goal is this, then the much maligned chart, area chart, I think becomes something more effective, right? The primary goal is to see total sales over time. That's the top of the line, right? Really easy to see. If you want to see whether A or B is growing, well, you can see the growth of B, but because of the varying baseline, it's not really easy to see whether A grew in this sort of 3-month period here. But as the chart designer, when you've considered what the primary goal is, then you are not guilty because that's the secondary goal, is to see specific things. If you switch that around, then suddenly the area chart does become the wrong chart choice. And, the specific line chart is probably what you want to be thinking about. To work out the total sales out of time on this chart, you have to do a bit of mental leaps to kind of combine the two in your head. So this is where I'm thinking of this. I got loads more content. I see this in economist charts. I see the way that they design primary and secondary. It's a way I really think heavily about whenever we critique charts. I think it's always on us as the critics or the viewers of the charts. Think, well, what was the primary goal and the secondary goal of this chart? And it's something I've pondered a long time. I first made a comment about this in a blog post from Stephen Few, and it was an infuriating kerfuffle a few years ago between Stephen Few and Cole Knaflick over the rights and wrongs of stacked bar charts. So Stephen Few they were having a conversation about this stacked bar chart, which appeared in Cole's first book. And the thing that frustrated me was that Stephen Few would not accept that a stacked bar chart works if the primary goal is to see proportions to whole. He said, it's like, this is the only right chart. This is the only way to visualize this data. And it just infuriated me because it's like, he didn't seem to, in my eyes, he wouldn't adjust the chart type to different primary goals, which would then make the secondary goal slightly harder to interpret. So I'm going to stop there in the limits of time. I'm thinking I'm going to develop this idea more. So I'm interested in comments from the hosts, comments from you on the audience. Does this make sense? Might it rethink how you would approach chart choice? It even helps me think about dashboard choices, which charts should be chosen on a dashboard. But the Voronoi, I love talking about Voronois because they really play around with, well, what are you trying to do most importantly? And what's the secondary goal?
Jeff, can I pipe in?
Please do.
So I'm trying to remember, well, why did I not like it here? And why was it okay in the electoral, showing the states needed to put Biden over the top? And is it because I am consistently inconsistent with these things? Or there's another very reasonable question that the primary Voronoi doesn't answer, which is how much did it beat it by? Is Airbnb 3 times as big as everything else as these things, et cetera? And as playful and fun as that is, you're not going to get it there. Well, with respect to your, go ahead, Andy. I'm sorry.
Well, I think that's the thing. If your goal is to communicate by how much the selected companies are bigger, then again, the Voronoi doesn't work, right? So I think in this goal, the designer, they're not trying to say, look, you've made it 30% bigger. They're just trying to say, the green circle is bigger than the dotted circle. That's it. That's our goal. And beyond that, our intent is not to add any more accuracy to that. And I get a sense that's a good way to justify a lot of chart choices. Because I can design a chart with my goals, and then I can't control what other people want out of every chart.
The other piece, Andy, is you showed the area chart versus the line chart comparing A and B. And this is where, hey, folks, maybe you need more than one chart to tell the complete story on this thing. Mm-hmm. So that's often the case.
I'm really glad you said that, Steve, because as I was developing this, I was like, well, I just bring in another chart. And I'm like, okay, but what if my constraint is I can't? But yeah, good one.
I mean, the playful piece of this gets at me too. And I think that we'll talk about this more with the New York Times spiral piece. And Tim made the really good point in the comments, actually talking about that the goal for an interactive chart is also to entertain and engage an audience that usually would be turned off by a bar chart. And I think that that's a really kind of salient point as we think about the ways in which these kind of interactive, fun, playful things can get people interested in charts in ways that they might not be in other ways.
I won't show this slide now. I have opinions on that, which might come up in the spiral chart relating to judging viz competitions. But good point. Excellent.
I have a feeling here that we have future chart chat topics boiling.
Yes, if that's the goal, then good stuff. Excellent. All right, thank you.
All right, well, I guess I'll jump in for my highlights of the year. I'll put some links in the chat window as well for everybody. But I think for me, I will discuss the Chart Chat 20 political mapping. Specifically, I love the Chart Chat 20 episode, just all the dialogue that we had around it. But specifically, I wanted to talk about problems in mapping. And one of the things I realized when I look back was I was really focusing on the common problem of maps, that is you're not visualizing a number by state, you're multiplying it by the size of land, right? So in the electoral college, that's the common problem where you're not really visualizing the number of electoral votes, you're doing the size of land. And we talked about this in that episode, and we showed Ken Flairledge, he had this great blog post in Viz about all the different ways that people try to show this data. And I guess what struck me is some of these show the Electoral College better than other, including the Voronoi circle that we just saw, the one that Andy just walked through. The tree map I love, which is a solution by Steve, and I love that as well. But what later dawned on me was it's not just a problem about area of land, and this is, you know, maybe something I've been thinking about. It's also the granularity of the data, that when you're summarizing data in a bar chart, in a line chart, in an area chart, you're aggregating it to some level. And in our workshops, we talk about this one where you have you as an individual maybe, and that's your salary, and this is the salary for everybody else in their generation. And then we sort of break that up and say, okay, well, now how does it look, right? You get a different picture when you bring in the granularity of the data, and you get a different feeling from it, right? You know the distribution of the data, you know where everybody else is. And so looking and thinking about that, that's where I was going when I created the crossing of the political divide, thinking about Ohio as a swing state. Well, yeah, you can look at it and say Ohio is a swing state, but then you look at Cincinnati and Cleveland and Columbus, they're swing cities. Sometimes they go more blue, sometimes they go more red. But then is that granularity enough? And you kind of think about, like, even within a city, you have these streets that divide your west side and your east side, and it just turns blue and it turns red. And then even down to a street in a neighborhood down here, where you're dividing a Norwood neighborhood that is red, and then literally across the street, everything is blue. And it struck me that it's more than just a mapping problem or a land problem. It's also, you know, the level of granularity. And so that got me thinking about that. The other topic I think maybe we talk about in the future is what's not in the data. And it's easy to plot, in this case, the red and the blue, or even the purple houses where you have one person registered for Republican and one for Democrat. But it's also the other side of the story, which is, why is Cincinnati a swing state, a swing city? Because more than half of the people in the city are unaffiliated. They might go one way or they might go the other. So that is interesting. It's sometimes the story is in the other part of the data. And so I really enjoyed that episode and that dialogue. We also happened to talk about our redesigns of the vaccination, which I thought was cool too. So there's links in there for that episode, and links to the Viz and Ken's Viz on that. My second topic that I wanted to pick was our last episode, Chart Chat 25, Atlas, the guys that the authors of Atlas of the Invisible. And these guys, I don't know how else to describe it as craftsmanship. What they create to me is just old world craftsmanship. It's like looking at somebody who's really good at woodworking, or a master electrician, or somebody who's just so skilled at what they do. And this book is just art. It just looking at it in print is amazing. The pictures are not going to do it justice. I took some images here, but I just check it out. And the episode really struck me back to what Amanda said, watching people work the process and their thinking process, and going from the beginning to the end of the product was really fascinating. And so we don't see that, right? You don't get the pictures in the book of where they started along the way. And so that episode, it was kind of a glimpse into their process, and the maps are just gorgeous. The level of detail, the care that was taken in creating this stuff. And so that one was special to me, and jumped out. And so I will stop there for any discussions.
I'm just going to say, Steve, Jeff, that one of my favorite pieces, if you go back to your unaffiliated part of that map, it is one of the best examples of where a pie chart is just so helpful. That little pie that you have in the upper right-hand corner, just showcasing that more than half of households or individuals are unaffiliated in the map view that you have. I think it's just a really nice example of how one tiny additional chart is really helpful there.
Thanks. Of course, I got a lot of grief from my colleagues at work. Jeff used a pie chart on Tableau Public.
I'm sure someone argued it should be a horizontal stacked bar that's kind of sitting up in the upper corner like a progress chart. But I think the pie is very effective there.
Thank you.
And I agree. I can clearly see that's more than half.
Yep.
Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, see, that's the primary goal of that pie chart in that purpose is it more than half?
Yeah.
All right. So
Over to you.
there we go. Hey, just a quick note, Jeff, the order that you chose to present things. Usually, if we were a bar chart, I'm usually a sort in descending order, but fine that you decided to go in ascending order, or what you perceive to be ascending order. The other thing is, we mentioned it in the comments in the chat, but as with other episodes of Chart Chat, there will be an after party. We will invite you to a Zoom meeting and you can weigh in and comment on our commenting on these things. In any case, I wrote a blog post about a few of my favorite things from 2021. I'm going to share them with you here. And I think this was my favorite chart. And I first saw it when Alex Selby Boothroyd of The Economist said, hey, I have a beef with this chart. And it got my attention. And I ended up subscribing to all these wonderful things that McKinsey and company are coming out with on a daily basis. I love this chart. And I'm like Mr. Boring bar chart guy. And sure, you can quibble with the, well, wait a minute, those oblong objects that are 3D and look like they have gases in them. And are you comparing the height of the cow or the area of the cow? All right, fine. This is not going to allow you to make an accurate comparison. That's not the importance of this. This is, I want to grab you by the lapels and say, did you know this? And boy, that got my attention. So given the context, the audience, if this has to cut through everything else people are looking at, I thought it was just great. So hats off to Jason Forrest, also of the Data Visualization Society, Gabrielle Marit, I think, and Gergo Varga. I think all of them are highly involved with the Data Visualization Society. I think many of us have seen the incredible work by the Vlog Brothers and 42 Amazing Maps. Jeff and I and Andy, we show that in our workshops. And Robert Cassara of Eager Eyes fame is producing some amazing video content. Sorry about that. And just stuff that is well crafted, well produced, well honed, beautifully illustrated and articulated. And I think it'd be nuts not to subscribe. So, look up Robert Cassara or Eager Eyes and subscribe to his video channel. I've learned so much about the Nightingale wedge diagram, the Menard chart, people's perception of pie charts, stuff that I really thought that I knew well. This is really worthwhile, and he's done just an amazing job. Of the incredible guests that we had on Chart Chat, John Byrne Murdoch, Tim Hartford, Ben Schneiderman, I think the episode I liked the most was with Alex Selby Boothroyd's colleague, Rosamund Pierce, that I really loved hearing the thought process, the different iterations, the difficulties, what tools they use. And for me, one of the issues was that it was, well, the type of stuff that she's grappling with is reasonably similar to the type of stuff I'm challenged with. Whereas Atlas of the Invisible, they're living in a different world and I have such respect and admiration for what they're doing, but it's in a totally different sphere of expertise. And the problems that The Economist and Rosamund is dealing with, well, that's kind of similar to a lot of the things that I see. So just hearing from someone who is so well versed and so thoughtful about how she thinks about these things and the feedback that she gets from colleagues, I just loved it. So I think that was episode 22 of Chart Chat, by the way, and highly recommend that you check it out. My favorite tool. So I think all of us are being asked to up our game, so to speak, and you're probably going to be asked to record some video at some point. Now, I do not have Amanda's and Jeffrey's ability to speak without any filler words, entire paragraphs brilliantly formulated. Jeff, you're a master of this, and you pointed out just how well versed Amanda is with this. I am definitely a lot of filler words type of guy, although I'm getting better. And this wonderful video editing tool, you edit it as if you are editing a text document. It transcribes everything that you have said, and you can get rid of entire swaths by just let me delete these 8 words. It will also look and highlight all the ers, ahs, etc., and either flag them or offer to take them all out. This thing is killer. Randy Knaflick recommended it to me, and pretty much everything I produce now that's recorded, I will put through Descript. And one more bonus thing, which is, I know we wanted to talk about the how would you show this, the vaccine intentions, and we had a lively discussion about this. But one of the things that caught my attention was that Amanda had used this font I had never seen before. It's actually a typeface. If it's a certain size and a certain boldness or thickness, it's a font. This typeface called Bond Schrift, and I just was really taken with it. So I've started using Bond Schrift in things that don't have to be published to Tableau Public because it won't render in Tableau Public. So Amanda, thank you so much for that.
That's great.
Andy, Amanda, any comments?
Steve, those are a couple of really good examples in terms of things from the past year. And the Rosamund episode strikes me also for the fact that it is very relevant. The pace at which they are producing charts and graphs, I think, is one of the things that struck me as a reminder about just the quality of work that they are able to achieve on really short time boxes and turnarounds, which is the same constraints that a lot of us have when we're working with clients or working in client environments in terms of rapidly spinning up charts and graphs and getting to a polished product. You don't have the luxury of the months or years that folks spend building the beautiful book of Atlas of the Invisible, which, I mean, I gifted as a Christmas present to people because I loved it so much. So I think that speed or pace of work and iteration that happens on that short time box for data journalists is something I feel like I keep learning more about and developing just ever increasing respect for.
Yeah, I just add I think the Chaos Viz as well, that's, we'll come on to that in the New York Times spiral chart. It's like, well, what's the primary purpose of that chart? Is it to stop people in their tracks, or is it to communicate data in the most cognitively easy manner possible? And the way they chose was for engagement. So that's another way I think of primary and secondary.
Well, Steve, you preferred descending order. We did it in ascending order. And so since all the comments are coming from my name, I don't know who typed that. You'll have to figure that out. But
I mean, I appreciate that there's a vote over here from Carlos that we should go ahead and repeat let's remake a data set many different ways from different people. And we'll take a note on that in terms of how we're planning our next Chart Chat episodes, because it is a really fun exercise for us too, to just see how different people think about the same data set in different ways.
Oh, you've got to given me another idea, not just how we would do it, but let's see if we can channel some other people who are out there. Say, I'm going to try to do this in the style of so-and-so is. There are some people that have some pretty clearly defined, I don't know, not necessarily clearly defined styles, but iconic visualizations with which they're associated. So
Andy, you had some big eyes at that remark, some big eyes.
I did the Menard chart in the style of David McCandless about 8 years ago. I mean, let's just have a look at that.
And as you're bringing that up, Jeff, you may remember. Sorry, Andy, this will just take a second. Early on, when it was just Jeff and I doing Chart Chat, we would start with, we'd show each other a bunch of dashboards or visualizations and say, "Can you guess who did this?" And I think we were both pretty good. We each got more than 50% of looking at it and going, "Oh, well, that's clearly Adam McCann. Oh, that's clearly so and so." So it's pretty fun.
Yeah, we should do that again. So I took Menard's chart, rich, multi-dimensional storytelling, beautiful engraving, a crafted piece some would say the best statistical chart ever made. And then I thought, what would it look like? Oh no, the image isn't there. No, the image isn't there. I'll find it. Oh my gosh, my blog.
Pretend this is a podcast,
Wow.
Andy, and you have to
we'll
describe
edit that
it.
in later. I'll see if I can find that. Wow, I'm leaving everybody on the edge of their seat.
No, they'll have to come back for our next episode, Chart Chat 27.
Oh, sorry.
Well, and I think it's funny as someone commented that we should invite one of those folks to design with us. What would be even more fun, perhaps, is 5 different designs, and can you all vote and pick out which one is the real David McCandless or whoever you're picking?
The real one is different than what happens when you have a lot of people voting on what is the best. You know, you get the People's Choice Award. You know,
but then there is a definitive answer. One of those is by the actual person who emulates that style, and the rest of us are just
right. That's which I much prefer that. You know, to which of these is the best.
Well, with that, I guess we are on to the spiral chart, the New York Times opinion piece. Authors Sarah and Gus, and we'll talk about that in a second. I think Steve, you reached out to them. The link is here, and it's a COVID viz. If you have not seen it, my slide is not moving. There we go, and it's in a circular form. I always say, you know, sometimes we work in a consulting role or we're in a business context, and the VP of all things circular requires something to be in circular form. In this case, this was something that just grabbed attention and went viral through the Data Viz circles, the Data Viz Society Slack channel and Twitter, and even made the rounds on TikTok, believe it or not. We'll talk about what it is and how it is, but let me show you this. Hopefully this will play for us.
Guys, new COVID graph just dropped. Okay, are you tired of your old and boring COVID graphs? Like blah, 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 boring, me too. Let me put you onto something. Circle graph. Okay, looks like a conch shell. I'm not getting any information from it, but it is spooky.
Not often a chart will be popular on TikTok. I think, you know, that's definitely something that is interesting. So I'm going to open the floor on this one. Feel free to put your comments. What do you think about it? Put that in the live stream as well. And I'm just going to open the floor and let it go from here.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to say that any COVID chart that 2 years into this pandemic can go viral that way obviously grabs people's attention and makes you feel something. And I'm really appreciating and loving the visual things people are seeing in this chart. Am I the only one who sees a tapeworm, for example? And I think that is one of the things that I saw when I was looking at this and seeing the commentary was, what are the shapes or things that we see in it? And how does it make us feel or react in different ways? Even the coloring of, does this look kind of like a weird intestinal kind of thing with that light pink? Even though it's the same light pink we've seen on the shaded area chart throughout the period. I've got a couple examples that I can tee up in terms of thinking about, is the spiral the problem? But I think, Andy, you had also some strong thoughts and opinions on this that I'd love to tee over to you before we start looking at other examples.
Well, it comes down to the primary secondary goal. If the primary goal of the designers was for it to go viral and get people to click on that link, then it succeeded. If the primary goal was to draw a line chart so you could see the change over time, then it failed because you can't really look at the spiral too cleverly. But I think you're going to talk about how you can look across the axes to compare over different time periods, right?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things teed up, and we can take a look at that if you want to. And you think that would be helpful?
Yeah, I've got some comments about how this relates to IronViz and DataViz competitions, which we can come on to when we've a little bit later, I think.
Sounds fair.
Just so people joining us who may not have followed the discussions, I didn't follow anything on Data Visualization Society, but I sure did on Twitter. And there was a lot of controversy around this, and people were up in arms and going, "This is the most unhelpful COVID chart ever." So there was a big fracas around this. And then a lot of people who are kind of data visualization purists coming to the defense of the chart creators going, This was very effective for exactly the reason Andy said. So that's why we wanted to bring this up now.
Yeah, so as we think about what the chart looked like, and I saw people who are epidemiologists also kvetching on this, by the way. So it wasn't just the data viz community. There were others who were making some serious comments. And I actually really appreciated one of the reimaginings that popped up because people started going ahead and reimagining this and thinking about how it could be displayed differently, arguing that it should have been a line chart, but we've all been looking at the same line and area charts on this data for a while. And as I look at the chart and I look at the original spiral chart, one of the things that doesn't happen for me on the original one is just really reinforcing just how big, relatively speaking, the actual period that we're in right now is compared to other previous periods in terms of overall caseload. And Emelia Wattenberger, who does a lot of great work in D3, did a bit of a reimagining that kept the spiral. And I really appreciated that because there was a lot of debate about, is the spiral the problem? And she did this reimagining that I thought really pointed to some of the ways in which small, different, seemingly small design decisions actually make a big difference in what you see in the patterns that jump out to you in terms of this chart. So you'll see her reimagining over here on the right, and you can compare it to the New York Times one on the left. And I want to point out a couple of the key things that I think make her chart easier for me to read compared to the New York Times one that grabs my attention because it just looks so garish to me in some ways. And maybe it should be at this point in a pandemic when we're 2 years in. And so Emelia had gone ahead and she added color as an additional encoding. So you see these hotspots showing up in ways that I didn't have my eye drawn to on the New York Times graphic, the kind of delta wave peak happening over back in the fall that you see with that darkening color palette. And I think that additional encoding helps a lot in terms of highlighting those really dense dark spots. You also see that she has an overlap so that her spiral is tight enough so that this current peak with Omicron is actually overlapping the previous year, which for me really reinforces just how big this is relative to the previous periods. And you can see that she has these labeled around the outside so we can clearly see the various different points in time in terms of the months that are being represented from the perspective of seasonality. You can see that she's gotten rid of these radial grid lines. So we have the lines here, but not the labels. And I actually really appreciate the replacement with using the labels instead. So it almost feels more like a clock of sorts, but month by month instead of hour by hour. And I find that that helps me in terms of understanding when these different peaks happen. And the center line is actually kind of an actual tightly knit circle here instead of it being a skewed spiral. And I saw multiple folks on Twitter trying to noodle out and figure out what it was that was being encoded with the distance from the center point, that radial distance of the spiral. And as best we could conclude, the answer is nothing. But if someone has a better answer to that, I would love to know if there's actual data or information encoded in that distance from that center point on the radius for the New York Times one. And just the balance of having this in an actual circle helps me a lot in terms of being able to look at it and look at it as a graph of seasonality or of different peaks and valleys over multiple years. And if you look at one of her original reimaginings to the degree of thinking about how we iteratively work on our different data viz products, you'll see that she actually originally started with these as individual bars. They were less smoothed. And she went back and she revised this and republished it and shared it. And you can actually go ahead and click on it on her website. I'll add a link in the chat. And you can select different countries now and actually see what different countries look like in this same spiral format. And for anyone who has strong feelings on this, the line chart was there in the article. If you clicked into the article,
that's the most
important,
such an important thing. There is a very important line chart. Yes, thank you.
But
so anyone who actually did click through it and didn't get stuck at the New York Times paywall, I suppose, if it was a paywalled article, I'm a subscriber, so I'm not sure about that. The line chart was there. So to everyone from the DataViz Twitter sphere who was getting angry about this not being a line chart, the line chart was available. So with that, any thoughts on these kind of different ways of looking at the spiral graph, the line chart, those kind of things? I can click back to some of the earlier slides with the side-by-side if that would be helpful.
Yeah. So I'll show my own version of the line chart. Can you bring that slide back up, Amanda?
Sure thing.
Because that line chart is not showing the data as the spiral chart, right? So let's look at the data in the spiral chart. Now, Cotgreave's law states that essentially the more innovative and crazy a chart type is, the sooner somebody will say it should have been a line chart or a bar chart. This one didn't. It didn't take very long for that to happen. So as you can see on the spiral chart, if you wanted to compare October or January 2020 to 2021 and to January 2022, an analytically valuable part of this chart design is you can just look up that vertical axis and you can go, it was thin, it was really fat, and holy cow, January 2022 is really strong. That is, and on the reimagining, that's a really strong analytical possibility in these charts. So there on the right hand side, you can go, let's look at September. You can see, just sort of cast your eye from the center, radiate out of the outwards, and compare one month to another. So I thought, what does a line chart look like with just this data, not with all that added stuff that the New York Times has got in their line chart? And I came up with something like this. Hopefully this is big enough on your screen. So here's the line chart, right? Here's the challenge. We've seen that chart for the last 3 years, right? That this is showing cases up to last week. You know, that's a shocking, visceral, high rise in the number of in the number of cases in the last few days. So, but that is not original. We'd seen that across the media. I then thought, what if? Well, the other great thing that I've just said about the circle is that it allows you to compare year over year. Well, taking just the data that was in the spiral chart, my next step would be, well, I'd make the x-axis the months of the year. So we've got January to December, and I draw a line for each draw a line for each different year. But there you've got a problem in that this data was published on the 3rd day of January. So the 2022 line, when you don't put the projection in like the NYT did, it's aesthetically daft, because this line just looks like a vertical axis line because it's gone from January the 1st and gone up so immediately quickly. There's a problem here with the moving averages, I've just realized. But that is another reason to me why the spiral it works, because even it should have been a line chart. It's not a very effective line chart if you draw it this way to compare years.
Well, that's because you're showing it the entire year. The chart designer so I did try to contact both chart designers, Sarah Chodesh and Gus Wezerek, and Sarah was quick to say she should not be given credit for the spiral chart. She just gave some feedback to Gus. She made the line chart. Each line is a separate month. So that's why. So it's an index chart comparing different months. So all those lines are different months.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that are highlighted is the current month of January 2022. And the other one that is prominent is a year ago this time. And everything else is more muted. So she's instead of trying to compare 365 days, of which you've only got 3 days of data, she's trying to compare 30 days. And I would love to hear at some point and speak with Gus as to what was some of the design thinking behind this. My understanding is both of these people kind of want to lay low a little bit. And the issue of, well, I'll come back to it. I want to hear what Jeff has to say about the spiral not being an exact spiral and not being centered. And I have some thoughts on it, but I'll hold off for a minute.
You're on mute, Jeff.
Jeff?
I'm muted. I think we would all acknowledge the spiral is, analytically, you're not going to get the same data that you are about the line chart. I think to Andy's point, the line chart is everywhere. That's how everybody does it. For years and years now, it feels like I've been updating the data from the New York Times GitHub. I create a viz, I update it, and I was doing this, right? I was doing this every other day or every week to keep up with it. And at some point it got so ubiquitous, if you just Google the word COVID, Google creates the line graph for you. Like, you don't have to build it anymore. It takes the data from the New York Times GitHub and it's live on the Google homepage. So I think that's how, to everybody's point, the line chart is not going to grab attention. We're all becoming, somewhat numb to that line chart, right? So to some extent, creating a chart that did get so much attention and did get so much discussion, both in and out of the data viz community, does say something about the chart, whether it works or not, right? And I'll just also point out, this is not the first and probably not the last time we're talking about circular charts on Chart Chat. We've talked about Florence Nightingale's chart. We've talked about radar charts. We've talked, we've had discussion after discussion about circular charts. So it's just interesting that it keeps popping up, right?
Can one of you put the spiral back for a second? Because Amanda, you were the first person who pointed out on the image on the left that, hey, there's something off about the spiral. And so a lot of people went off being upset that this was not a correctly centered spiral. Robert Kosara, to whom I alluded a while ago, said, oh, he drew an exact Archimedes spiral to show that this thing was off. And then within the Twitter fracas that was going on, Professor Matthew Kay from University of Michigan had the best comment. Was he said, yes, and that makes it a little more unsettling, which I thought spot on. This is not supposed to be a warm, comforting image. It is supposed to be, I consider it a value-added big neon sign pointing to the 24-hour diner that says, here, come here. That instead of it being some just random disturbing image, there is a chart embedded, there is data that's here, but it is saying, hey, I want you to come in and I don't want you to find it comforting. And oddly, I find the reimagined version on the right, whatever it is, the color coding, I find, well, that looks rather soothing to me. So in that respect, I'm wondering if it works or not. But I thought the thing worked as a value-added image. Value-added meaning there's actually data that's encoded in this thing if you want to look at it. But I think its main purpose was I need you to draw you in, and not just with another chart that we've all been looking at for the last 2 years.
When you say draw in, though, I really want to know how many people clicked through and read the article. That was not about historically like the patterns in this data necessarily, but more so about just the record numbers were projected to hit in January, and that's coming to fruition. I think that's one of the curious questions to me too, is just how charts get used outside of different contexts and get pulled out of articles and other spaces and shared. And it's something we should all be aware of when we're designing visualizations and putting them out in the world, is how do you best kind of create these self-contained images or graphs that if someone sees them outside of the context of the original publication, they're still valuable and valid. And not that this isn't, it certainly grabs attention and is disconcerting in different ways and has a lot of those feeling pieces, Steve. But I'm struck by just how much this was shared without even a link back to the source.
Fair point.
Daniel asked a great question. Bottom line, would any of us recommend this to our database students?
I'll jump in. I'll go with a resounding no, probably. But again, I'm going to say, what's the purpose, right? Most of my students aren't creating pieces for the New York Times to grab attention and get clicks, right? Most of my students, I'm in the business college, so most of my students are creating stuff to gain insights in a business. So if in an exterior environment out in the world and you're trying to get attention, I don't know that I would mind creating something. I come back to, we've talked about this a number of times. This was an Iron Viz. Ludwig did this a number of years ago, and I enjoyed it. I think it's creative, it's beautiful. Again, do you get the same information that you would from a straight line chart? No. But if your point is to grab attention and bring focus to a topic, I think it could work. And then, like Amanda said, underneath, when you click in, maybe you give the user the analytical charts, like a line chart or an area chart, that they can get the data or a table.
Mm-hmm. I think people should explore circular charts. I think they have a really valid place in the field. Certainly from a Tableau perspective, they teach you how drawing a radial chart requires you to have deep knowledge of the tool. So from that perspective, but people like circular things. And I mean, I was just looking down, I can't see it now, but the Book of Circles by Manuel Lima is a wonderful book that really makes a very strong justification for the existence of circular charts. And as Jeff says, but you have to, as a student, you have to learn when is appropriate to use that form.
And when is it appropriate, Andy? In Iron Viz competitions?
Let's just talk about data viz competitions for a moment. I judge a lot of data viz competitions, one of which is IronViz, but I do a bunch of others. And I'm going to reveal a secret. Right. This is not from an IronViz entry. But here's the thing. When I am presented with a radial chart in an IronViz entry, I almost always mark you down. That's right. Radial charts cost you points in the eyes of Andy Cotgreave as a judge. I can't speak for the other judges. Why is that? There was a recent one I did judge in the previous IronViz. Beautiful chart, really great analytically, and then there was a radial chart at the bottom, and it looked cool. Yes, it looked amazing. Did it demonstrate great Tableau skills? It looked amazing. But what's the goal of IronViz or a data viz competition? In IronViz, it's specifically and be judged on analysis, design, and storytelling. Now, check out this bump chart. Is great. It's from Alexander. He hacks Tableau to pieces. And in the blog post describing this, he also says, well, I've done this. It doesn't make sense visually in terms of best practice for analytics. Right. So can I see the story of one team over time? Can I compare it to the others? So does the design support the analysis and the storytelling? No and no. And again, it comes back to primary and secondary. Why are people entering IronViz? And primarily, right, above all else, we want people to enter IronViz to develop their skills of Tableau and to have fun growing community. And that's why anybody should enter. But I kind of think most people are trying to succeed in the IronViz judging criteria. And secondarily, they're trying to create data art. Sometimes I think people forget that they are getting assessed on analysis and storytelling. So just think next time you can make a beautiful, beautiful bar chart with a straight axis at the bottom. You can make a bump chart. All those things can be designed absolutely gorgeously. Gorgeously, that's not even a word. But you maybe don't want to stick with the radial approach if you want to win. Anyway, there you go. That's my little preachy lesson.
Secret sauce from Andy on
Yeah. Yeah. But I do love circular charts. So don't get me wrong there. Circular charts are great, but think about when to use them.
I'd like to see some examples of where you think this succeeded from an analytic standpoint, as
the one I just showed,
a visceral standpoint.
This one.
This does not succeed in your criteria from an analytic standpoint.
No, I don't think that
I'm saying not now, some other time. Examples of here's a purely circular chart, and it trumps anything that might have been done. It is beautiful, and it is not in any way compromised analytically.
I don't think that. I think the radial approach is always going to compromise. Hopefully, I haven't given the opinion that.
Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first.
And IronViz season is open right now, so hey.
Sorry, I just turned somebody's screen off. Yeah.
Jeff,
you're on mute again.
Jeff, you're muted. Jeff, we can't hear you.
I was just going to say that this is a good example of something that went viral just and couldn't be more simple. It's a line chart, an area chart by Bo McCready, and it went viral on Reddit and got 350,000 views on Tableau Public and got all kinds of attention. And it's just an area chart, right? So,
fair point. I know we're wrapping up and getting close to the end of our time. Jeff, do we have a couple announcements to share before we wrap up and head over to the after party?
We do, and some links to share with everybody. I guess that would be the screen. Our workshops, recordings, and resources are available at the Big Book of Dashboards. We'll put these links in the chat window here in a second. And coming up, Steve is doing a workshop, the first workshop on the big picture, Steve?
This will be the very first one on it. Yes.
Mm-hmm. March 3rd, online. Correct?
Correct. Online.
All right. So check that out.
In your bunny slippers.
Coming up, Charts in Context on January 24th. That's this coming Monday, 3 to 4. It's a Data Viz Society fireside chat. Anything you want to say about that, Amanda?
Yeah, if you love these kind of conversations about the nuances and weeds of how charts get made and how they get used, we'll be talking about the ways in which charts are narrated or presented, instead of focusing just on the chart design themselves, but how the context within which we share charts and information, whether they're interactives or static graphs and charts to communicate key findings, are influenced by how we go ahead and present them. We've got some great experts speaking from the perspective of academics, practitioners, and accessibility experts, talking about how accessibility features into that conversation about charts and context.
Awesome. Thank you. I will be teaching at the University of Cincinnati Center for Business Analytics. It's a new course. It's just 2 days, mornings, 9 to noon. It's online, Eastern time. It's mapping in Tableau and Mapbox. So covering some more intermediate advanced topics of mapping and how to integrate Mapbox, and covering, if you've never used Mapbox, we'll start sort of from the beginning of Mapbox and try to get into some advanced mapping in Mapbox. Finally, we have our Chart Chat live next episode. I think that'll be round 27, is on February 17th, 11 a.m. Eastern, and a link to that. And last but not least, please join us for the after party. As we finish up here, we will move over to the Zoom platform so that it's not streamed, and we can continue the discussion with everybody here. So please join us for that.
So I'm going to sign off at the moment just to start that. Maybe somebody can type that URL into the chat so people can copy it. I will see everybody shortly.
See you soon, Steve.
Big
The link is in the chat. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining this episode of Chart Chat.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Thank
Let
you
us
so
know what you agreed and disagreed with.
And let us know if you have ideas for what you'd love to see us chat about in the future.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone.